poetry and jazz.
Can you hear the thunder? Can you hear the thunder? My love cascading towards you in a torrent of hope. Chases over sun-drugged streets of midday, over frost-stung fields of midnight that breathe beneath your window. Can you hear it now? Perhaps the tone is too high or the words too long, or perhaps the rain or pain has washed it away. Don't go. Listen, listen. Let me try my song again.
In 1961, a resourceful and enterprising young Mr. Jeremy Robson, the poet and publisher, also a passionate jazz fan, launched a daring and innovative concept that would endure a decade and constitute over some 300 concerts, as well as many recordings and broadcasts. This Sunday, April the 3rd, 2022, we reunite and revisit the poetry and jazz universe some 50 years since the last performance, this time at Oxford's gorgeous Sheldonian Theatre in the Oxford Literary Festival. The concert will feature 4 of the original personnel: Norma Winstone, voice, Art Themen on saxophones, Dave Green, double bass, and Jeremy Robson himself. We're also joined by very special guest Dame Maureen Lipman. Myself on violin, Dave Gordon on piano, and Tom Hooper on drums complete the lineup. I spoke to Jeremy Robson ahead of Sunday's concert, and I asked him what was it that made poetry and jazz so compelling. We've got a big concert in Oxford next week, which comes 60 years after the first jazz poetry concerts, which you instigated, you imagined, didn't you? You were the one who first came up with the whole idea.
I did. I had a 1961, I organised, for some mad reason, a poetry and jazz concert at the Hampstead Town Hall, which I cheekily called Poetry Returns to Hampstead. And there was a queue down the high street. And Spike Milligan, who came at the very last minute to read some children's verses, said, "Why don't you read? We must do something bigger." We took the festival hall, and it was a sellout. And the Daily Mail called it a piece of history that 3,000 people listened to poetry. Gave them the reception normally reserved to the great names of music. And it so happened that Michael Garrick, your dad, had a concert organised in one of the other rooms of the festival hall almost the next day, and I went to that and was very impressed and introduced myself. And from then on, we did about over 300 concerts together.
I also spoke to Norma.
I remember you in your cot.
I remember bouncing on your knee.
Do you?
I think so.
Must have been
early 70s. It's conceivable, isn't it, that you would have seen?
Oh, yeah.
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 Well, thanks for reminding me of that. But you go back with Dad a bit before that as well, don't you? You first started working in the mid-60s.
Well, I don't know. I think I first met him in the mid-60s with the New Jazz Orchestra. I was helping to run a little club on a Wednesday night in Hackney, and it turned out it was owned by the Cray twins. I didn't know that. I didn't even know who they were anyway. Then, even if somebody had said the Cray twins owned it, but somehow we knew the guy behind the bar, and he said, "You can hire this. You can have this every Wednesday or something." So we started a club and booked guests, and one of the guests was Ian Carr. And I mean, I hadn't done anything really, but I used to sing, with the trio that we'd got. And Ian said, "Oh, I'm going to introduce you to Neil Ardley, and you should sing with the New Jazz Orchestra." So he did introduce me to Neil, and Michael was on piano. And so that's where I met him. And he said to me, "Oh, look, I've written some songs. I've written the words as well. Would you like to have a look at them and see if you'd like to sing any of them?"
Yeah.
So I looked at them, and so I went along to a sextet gig. That's when he had Art, Ian, and Jim Phillip.
Flute player.
In front line. And I sat in and I sang one of his songs, And I went to sit down, and he said, no, stay on the stand and join in with the next piece. Well, I didn't know what the next piece was, but I think it was a one chord thing, probably Temple Dancer or something. And so I just listened, and I took a wordless solo. I think it was probably the first time I'd done that. And at the end of the evening,
really?
Yeah. And at the end of the evening, Michael said, Jim's leaving. Would you like to take over his part, sing the parts that he's been playing? And for me, that was just a fantastic opportunity, because it's the kind of thing that I'd wanted to do, although I didn't really know what it was. I wanted to do something different, and that certainly was different.
All men's devotion, thus we disport our limbs to his divine motion. Our lips browsing in space feed on invisible flowers, save when their luminous petals bloom softly with
Dave Green was one of the two principal double bass players. Coleridge Good was the other. I put it to him that perhaps it would seem odd and unusual to be performing jazz alongside poetry.
No, it did. It was a very natural thing, and of course, Mike was so good at setting pieces to music with the poetry and the person, the poet himself, in mind. You know, very successful at doing it. To my mind, far more successful than other examples I heard. You know, from that same period. So I think it will stand the test of time as well. Actually, I think it was beautiful music then, and beautiful music will always be beautiful music, you know.
Yeah.
That doesn't change.
Yes.
So I'm looking forward to playing those lovely pieces that Mike wrote for all of the poets.
And there are so many different types of poets: Spike Milligan, Vernon Scannell, Danny Absey, and
that's right.
Ted Hughes. And not all of them played. Not all of them, interestingly, spoke with a musical accompaniment, did they? Some of them spoke unaccompanied.
No. That's right. Stevie Smith, I remember, did some of the works, but it was, for me, it was very educational. It was just a great experience for me, you know, to be involved with these wonderful people.
Art Themen was among many instrumentalists to play alongside the poets, including others such as Don Rendell, Joe Harrett, Sheikh Keane, and Ian Carr.
Well, it's power to your father's elbow, the fact that he and Jeremy sort of got it all together in the first place, which was terrific. But as you say, it's gone underground for 40 years, isn't it?
Yeah.
At the time, it worked. You know, all those characters, Vernon Scannell and John Smith, you know, great people, and you know, the likes of whom I'm not seen for, you know, since then. No, jazz and poetry. Got to work. I see Jeremy from time to time. During lockdown, I used to play in my little lane in Henley-on-Thames, and 6 days a week actually for about 4 months, and then the seventh day there was poetry, and on the seventh day we used to read, and I would read from time to time one or two of Jeremy's poems. So it lived on a little bit.
Oh, lovely. So pleased you mentioned that.
Well, I can't wait to relive some of the experiences with you and Norma and Art and Dave, who were there with you at the end of the 60s. It's going to be a privilege to take part in this concert.
I remember after your dad's funeral and the concert that you gave, and Norma sang a song around one of my poems called Some of These Days. And when I went to Pop to get my car afterwards, a stranger said that was the most moving thing I've ever heard. Because she sang it with such feeling and passion. It was fantastic. It was a song my mother used to sing, so it had a special meaning for me. Not quite as well as Norma.
It was a very memorable concert, wasn't it?
Now the birds begin to crow. it is the time for them to grow. Below them, hurrying cars have almost reached their destinations. The crowded trains shrug slowly from the stations. Soon they will be gone. Only gaping stars, lonely and unwatched, guard the sleeping city.